Hello viewers, welcome to today's session. In this session, we are going to have discussion on Bloom's taxonomy and academic standards. In this session, we are going to discuss the Bloom's taxonomy, the revised Bloom's taxonomy, the academic standards, the relationship between Bloom's taxonomy and academic standards, and finally the classroom implications of Bloom's taxonomy and the academic standards. Now, as teachers, when we attempt to teach something, before we enter the class, 4 important questions arise in our mind. Number 1, what to teach. Second, why to teach, and how to teach, and finally how to assess the performance of the children. So the first question speaks about the content, the syllabus or the topics that we are going to teach. It speaks about the content. It also speaks about the entire curriculum, the syllabus, etc. The second point, why to teach, it speaks about the objectives of teaching. What is my objective of teaching in this particular session? What am I going to give to the children? The third is how to teach. This speaks about the methods of teaching, the techniques, the strategies that we adopt in teaching in this session. And finally, how to assess the performance of the children. And this is going to assess the performance of the children, evaluate the performance of the children. So I just would like to quote Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi speaks on education. By education, I mean an all-round development of the child, the body, the mind and the spirit. So the ultimate objective of education is making of the man. So we bring all-round development of the child. If this is our objective, what should be done? How to teach and how to evaluate? Now, how to evaluate the changes in the personality of the child? What is the basis for this evaluation? Several educationists, educational psychologists have put in a lot of efforts to find answers to this question. And we have national objectives, we have instructional objectives and specifications, and nowadays we also speak about academic standards. So how to evaluate the overall performance of the children? When our objective is to bring changes in the personality of the children, what strategies do we have to adopt to evaluate the personality of the children? Now, in order to answer this question, we have to discuss Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy was created in 1956 under the leadership of educational psychologist Dr. Benjamin Bloom in order to promote higher order thinking in education. Analyzing, evaluating the concepts, processes, procedures and principles is more important than just remembering facts. Benjamin Bloom and his associates have done tremendous work in developing this Bloom's taxonomy. And in the year 1949, American Psychological Association have assembled to discuss the modalities to finalize the Bloom's taxonomy. And it was named after Bloom's, and this was published in two handbooks, that is Handbook on Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. Even though Bloom's taxonomy was developed on the lines of behaviorist mode of curriculum, it was aimed at developing higher order thinking. What do you mean by higher order thinking? Higher order thinking by students involves the transformation of information and ideas. This transformation occurs when students combine facts and ideas and synthesize, generalize, explain, hypothesize, or arrive at some conclusion or interpretation. So higher order skills, when we talk about it, manipulating information and ideas through these processes allow students to solve problems, gain understanding, and discover new meaning. In helping students become producers of knowledge, the teacher's main instructional task is to create activities or environments that allow them to opportunities to engage in higher order thinking. This is the version given by the Department of Education, Queensland in 2002. So nowadays, we are talking about academic standards. As a matter of fact, in the recent past, there have been several changes in the curriculum, in the methodology of teaching, and also in the assessment procedures. So across the globe, now we are talking about academic standards. Even the state of Telangana has adopted certain academic standards in each and every subject. Let us look at academic standards. Academic standards describe educational objectives, that is, what students have learned by the end of a course, a grade level or grade span. But they do not describe any particular teaching practice, curriculum, or assessment method. Although this is a source of ongoing confusion and debate, it was done in 2014 on February 4th. Nowadays, we are talking about academic standards. And what is the relationship between academic standards and Bloom's taxonomy? Bloom's taxonomy, many people say that it is outdated and it has lost its relevance in the current pedagogy. But it is not true. Bloom's taxonomy is the basis of many educational philosophies. It's a source of inspiration for developing various methods. And that is why we can see all academic standards in Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy has moved from lower levels of thinking to higher levels of thinking. And it is a hierarchical arrangement of the thinking patterns in the students. So what do you mean by taxonomy? Taxonomy means classification or classification of forms or levels of learning. According to Plutarch, mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be ignited. So Bloom's taxonomy consists of 3 domains. Number 1, the cognitive domain, psychomotor domain. Number 3, affective domain. As you see the diagrammatic presentation on the screen, these 3 are interrelated. The objective of this taxonomy is to bring overall development in the minds of the children. So these are all interconnected. They are all inseparable. These 3 domains will guide us to bring overall development. And now let us look at these three domains. These are also popularly called 3 H's, the hand, heart, head combination. Number 1, cognitive domain. This concentrates on head, also knowledge. The second one is affective domain. This is focusing on heart, means emotions, thoughts, etc. And finally, psychomotor domain. This speaks about hand or skills. So when we talk about these 3 domains, now let us look at cognitive domain and let us discuss it in detail. The cognitive domain involves knowledge and the development of intellectual skills. This includes the recall or recognition of specific facts, procedural patterns and concepts that serve in the development of intellectual abilities and skills. There are 6 categories of cognitive processes, starting from the simplest to the most complex. As we have discussed earlier, Bloom's and his men have aimed at dividing the content from simple to complex, from lower level thinking to higher level. So in cognitive domain, we focus on recall or recognition of specific facts, procedural patterns. So now in cognitive domain, actually during Bloom's period, Bloom and as his associates have concentrated on developing cognitive domain. This cognitive cognitive domain, it was compiled in the year 1953 and it was published as a handbook of educational objectives, taxonomy of educational objectives. It was published in 1956. And later his own associate Anderson has revised it and it was published as a new version, that is revised Bloom's taxonomy. So if you look at these two, there are certain variations. We will discuss them after a little later. Suppose if you look at the screen, you can see the differences between two versions. Original cognitive domain developed by Bloom and the new version developed by Anderson. So when you move from bottom to top in a hierarchical manner, you will see knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and finally evaluation. And there are some changes you can find in the new revised version, that is remembering, understanding, applying, evaluation and creating. We will look at the changes a little later. Now let us come to second domain, that is affective domain. In affective domain, it was developed by David Krathwohl, Bloom and Messier in 1973. It includes the manner in which we deal with things emotionally, such as feelings, values, appreciation, enthusiasms, motivations and attitudes. The objective of this affective domain is to develop the interests, attitudes, then appreciation among the children. And when we talk about the overall development of the child, we have to develop the child not only in matters of knowledge, we should also bring changes in his behavior. in his character. We should promote attitudes, and we should teach them how to appreciate when something good happens. Now, this affective domain is again categorized. There are again 5 major levels. This is also just like a cognitive domain arranged in a hierarchical manner, that is moving from bottom to top, that is receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and finally characterization. These are the 5 steps that we can see. Emotionally, when we see, even when the children are learning, of course, they first low level children in the first level, they simply listen to something and passively receive, and then they respond to it. In the next level they respond, and in the next level they try to value to what they listen, what they understand, and try to understand the real value of it. So in this way they will go to the last stage, that is characterization. So let us come to the third domain, that is psychomotor domain. Actually, psychomotor domain was not published. It was developed by Simpson and Harrow and also R.H.Dave, and it was unpublished, but it has become so popular across the world. The psychomotor domain, according to Simpson in 1972, actually there are 3 versions: Simpson's version, there is Harrow's version, and R.H.Dave's version. So now let us see what Simpson says about it. The psychomotor domain, according to Simpson, includes physical movement, coordination, and use of the motor skill areas. Development of these skills requires practice and is measured in terms of speed, precision, distance, procedures, and techniques in execution. Thus, psychomotor skills range from manual tasks such as digging a ditch or washing a car to more complex tasks such as operating a complex piece of machinery or dancing. Psychomotor domain is all about kinesthetic intelligence among the children. Now let us look at the R.H.Dave's version of the psychomotor domain. The committee did not produce a compilation for the psychomotor domain model, as we have already discussed, but the other members of the committee, like Simpson, in 1972 he has developed his own model, R.H.Dave has developed his own model in 1970, and Harrow also produced his own in the year 1972, and they have done it in a different way. The psychomotor domain, it all speaks about physical activity, hands-on experience, how they manipulate, how they handle different tools. And if you see, again there are 5 levels in it, 5 levels of learning. We start from imitation, move to manipulation, then on to precision, then on to articulation, and finally naturalization. So imitation, manipulation, precision, articulation, and naturalization. Actually in the beginning, in the initial stage of learning, every child imitates somebody, and maybe their parents, maybe their teachers or somebody, and they try to reproduce, and then in the second stage they manipulate, and try to add their own way of doing the things, and in the next stage they try to get the precision, they refine. After refinement they get precision, exact way of doing, and finally they express the things, articulate the things, and the activity, finally the action will become natural process. It becomes natural for the child. He acts very easily, and he handles the tools with ease. And when we look at playing different games, or even riding of bicycles, or otherwise any physical activity starts with imitation, and finally it ends with the naturalization. Now let us once again come back to Bloom taxonomy and the two versions that we were talking about, Bloom and Anderson's words, that is old version and new version. Let us look at the differences between these two, and there are two changes have happened. First of all, when you look at Bloom's version, we see knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and finally evaluation. But in Anderson's version, that is new version, which was published in the year 2001, it says remembering, understanding, applying, then analyzing, evaluating, and finally creating. So if you see the changes, you can easily understand changes in two versions. The noun forms have been changed into verbal forms. It means evaluation has become evaluating, then knowledge has become remembering. The reason for this is the change in terminology. As thinking is an active process, verbs were used rather than nouns, because we talk about actions only. So when it comes to actions, we speak in terms of verbs. The subcategories of the 6 major categories were also replaced by verbs, and some other categories were recognized. The knowledge category was renamed. The knowledge is an outcome or product of thinking, not a form of thinking. So consequently, the word knowledge was inappropriate to describe a category of thinking and was replaced with the word remembering instead. So instead of knowledge, now we are using remembering. We talked about it. Remembering means recalling, restating, etc. Then comprehension was renamed as understanding. Synthesis was changed as creating in order to better reflect the nature of thinking. And there are changes in the emphasis also. Bloom's taxonomy was traditionally viewed as a tool best applied in the primary levels. In the revised taxonomy, it is more universal and easily applicable at elementary, secondary, and even tertiary levels. So the revision emphasizes explanation and description of subcategories. So these are the two changes that we can see in the old version and new version. Now let us look at the subcategories. Remembering. Now what do you mean by remembering? In remembering, we see the learner is able to recall, restate, and remember learned information, facts, terminologies, basic concepts, methods, principles, generalizations, examples, classifications, categories, events, data, etc. The learner is expected to remember the facts or recall the facts, the terminology, the basic concepts, the methods, the principles. Suppose if they happen to learn something new, suppose if it is about science or social studies, so whatever the terminology that comes in dealing with the concept, they have to remember. What is the basic concept in it? What are the principles involved in it? All these things will be discussed in this. If you look at the verbs that we use in remembering, we use list, memorize, relate, show, locate, distinguish, give examples, reproduce, quote, repeat, label, recall, know, and read, listen, group, choose, recite, review, and match, select, underline, cite, sort, sort out, write, outline. These are all the various verbs we use in order to understand the concept of remembering. Now look at the picture. How can we check the understanding of the children, remembering of the children? For example, look at the picture. By showing the picture, for example, now we see there is a picture and there is a small story, and this story is about very familiar story, the story of an old farmer and his 4 sons. We all know once there lived an old farmer in a village. He had 4 sons. They always quarreled among themselves. The father often advised them to maintain, to mend their ways, but they did not listen to him. One day he fell seriously ill. He was on deathbed. He called his sons to his bedside. He wanted to teach them a lesson before his death. He asked them to bring a bundle of sticks. The bundle was brought. He asked them to break the bundle. Each of them tried his best, but no one could break the bundle. The wise father now untied the bundle. He asked them to break 1 stick each. Now each of them broke his stick easily. The father said to them, "If you are united, nobody can harm you. If you quarrel, you will suffer." These words worked magic. They promised to live in peace. This is the story, and this is the picture already you have seen. So now if you want to assess the performance of the children as far as the remembering is concerned, you can ask them a few questions like this. Make a list of main events of the story, make a timeline of events, and make a facts chart, make a list of any piece of information you can remember. In this way, any story, not only this story, any story you can ask in order to test their ability to remember. Suppose as far as this particular story is concerned, we can ask the following questions. What happened to the old man? How many sons does he have? What did the old man want to teach? How did the sons live at the end of the story? And this is actually a lower level of thinking happens, but this paves way for higher order thinking. So next comes understanding. What do you mean by understanding in cognitive domain? The learner grasps the main meaning of the information by interpreting, translating what has been learned by the learner. It means, understanding means there are various things involved in understanding. In understanding, there is interpreting, exemplifying, summarizing, inferring, paraphrasing, classifying, comparing, and explaining. It means, in understanding, when can we say that a person has understood something? When someone is able to explain something on his own, in his own words, then understanding is made. So understanding is done with regard to the facts, the concepts, the examples, the formulas, the principles, the methods, etc., and about anything that is given on the topic. For example, what sort of questions can be asked on the given story, the story that we have discussed a little while ago? The questions for understanding: what is the central idea of the story? Can you write a brief outline of the story? What do you think could have happened next? Then how do you compare the nature of the father and his sons? So these questions will promote understanding among the children. And third one is applying. The learner makes use of information in a context different from the one in which it is learnt. The ultimate objective of learning is to apply the knowledge in a given situation. The learners, after listening, after reading, after observing something, they should apply the knowledge that they have gained in their real life situations. For example, in a social studies context, the teacher has taught them the road rules. After listening to road rules, the symbols, the road, where to cross, the road, the name boards and all, the child should be able to follow the rules when he is crossing the road or while he is going on the road. Then only it means that he has applied that knowledge. So there we can see implementing, carrying out the knowledge, using the knowledge in the situation, executing the knowledge. So in this way we can use so many verbs in order to evaluate the performance of the children. There are various things like how to translate, manipulate, exhibit, illustrate, calculate and make, practice, apply, operate, interview, various words we can use to test the understanding of the children and how they are applying their knowledge in their day-to-day life. They can solve their problems in their day-to-day life and they can use the technology or the tools and use the knowledge in their day-to-day life. In this way we can use, and what questions can be framed? For example, these are the sample questions which we can use. Do you know of another instance? Can you group by characteristics such as, this question also can be asked. Or suppose in real life situations you can ask, how do you use this particular tool in different context? For example, from the information given, can you develop a set of instructions about transportation? Like this you can ask them to apply the knowledge. So the next comes analyzing. Analysis means, analyzing involves examining and breaking information into component parts, determining how the parts relate to one another, identifying motives or causes, making inferences and finding evidence to support generalizations. And its characteristics include analysis of elements, analysis of relationships, analysis of organization. In the current pedagogy, we are talking about the analysis of knowledge, and this is also a higher order thinking. That is the reason in the current pedagogy, in current textbooks, we are talking about analytical questions, and in every subject, whether it is science or maths or social or languages, we promote analytical thinking, reasoning among the children. So that is why the questions are asked in a way, in such a way that the children will be using the power of analysis. So analyzing includes comparing various concepts, organizing ideas, deconstructing the concepts, then attributing, outlining, finding, structuring, integrating, all these are involved in the analysis. And finally, let us see analytical questions. You can see a picture on the screen, and by showing this picture to the children, you may ask a few analytical questions to test whether the children are able to analyze the given information or not. Let us see questions for analyzing. What do you think the woman in the picture carrying water? Or why do you think the woman in the picture carrying water? What could have happened to the village? What do you think is the reason for their problem? So, after seeing the picture, the children will be able to analyze the context in which the women are carrying water. They can guess, they can imagine certain things, they can predict certain things. Based on their analysis, they will come out with certain conclusions. So, now let us come to evaluating. Evaluating is all about giving judgment. Evaluating involves presenting and defending opinions by making judgments about information. The validity of ideas or quality of work based on a set of criteria, its characteristics include judgment in terms of internal evidence, judgments in terms of external criteria. So, in evaluating, they are expected to judge, they are expected to give their opinion, they have to praise, they have to give value, they have to argue, they have to criticize. So, these are all the qualities of evaluating. What sort of questions can be asked in evaluating? Is there a better solution to this problem? This is a sample question I am giving you. For example, after seeing the picture, after reading the story of old man and 4 sons, what would you do if you were the old man? Or what would you do if you were in the position of one of the sons? So, what is your reaction? After reading a particular story or particular novel, which character do you like? Why? Suppose if you were in that position, in that situation, what would you do? So, the situation has to be analyzed, and the child has to apply his own knowledge, his own understanding about the world, and he has to pass the judgment. So, he has to personalize based on the facts and figures. So, in this way you can ask certain questions. Do you believe, would you feel if, how effective are, what are the consequences, what influence will, like this you can ask, what are the pros and cons of this, that and all. So, in this way you can ask certain sample questions. And finally creating, and this is what is actually the higher order skill that we are talking about. Nowadays all the new textbooks have been revised to promote creativity among the children. In fact, this is the age of creativity. The people who are more creative can rule the world. So, the people, how to develop this creative skills among the children. Learner creates new ideas, information using what has been previously learnt. So, we have reached the top level of the hierarchy in the ladder of learning. In this, based on their knowledge, based on their understanding, based on their application of the knowledge, they will be able to create new knowledge. It means with the knowledge they have, they will produce new knowledge. It means the children have the ability to create their own knowledge. They can construct their own knowledge. Nowadays we are talking about constructivism. Constructivism believes in the child's ability to construct his or her own knowledge. So, construction of knowledge takes place by integrating the past experiences with the present experiences. So, in this he will design, the child will design they will construct, they will plan, produce, invent and devise and make new things. So there are various things we can use: compose, assembling, organizing, invent, various words we can use. For example, let us look at this picture on the screen. By seeing this picture, we can ask questions like this for testing their creativity. What solutions can you suggest to solve the drinking problem of the village you see in the picture? What measures could you give to avoid such acute drinking water shortage in villages? It means the child, having seen so many situations like this, having experienced, he will come out with different solutions. So now let us look at this quotation given by Fisher. I quote, "A good teacher makes you think even when you don't want to." It was given in 1998, Teaching Thinking. So a good teacher always aims at creating thoughts in the minds of the children. So now let us link academic standards to Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy and present academic standards. There are certain conflicting ideas about Bloom's taxonomy. Some people say that Bloom's taxonomy is outdated and it has lost its relevance. Even though some people argue like this, but Bloom's taxonomy is a guiding principle. It's a source of inspiration for many educators across the world to invent new methods, new strategies of teaching and learning procedures. So that is why, for example, in English, as far as English is concerned, we have academic standards in English: listening and speaking, reading and comprehending, conventions of writing, vocabulary, grammar, creative expression. What are our objectives? Our objective is to attain these 6 academic standards. These 6 academic standards are targeted in nearly 20-21 discourses, and 19 of them are targeted in 10th class itself. So all these academic standards are found in Bloom's taxonomy. Those principles which we have discussed, or the taxonomy that we discussed, that will guide us as to how to achieve these academic standards by adopting the techniques. And we are talking about learning outcomes. For example, I have taken 8th class English. In 8th class English, listening and speaking, for example, in listening and speaking, we expect participates in debates, discussions, conversations with the people from different professions. So using appropriate vocabulary, discourse markers, appropriate cohesive devices, maintaining social norms. The children are expected to listen and speak, but how much of listening should happen and how much of speaking should happen at 8th class? These are all defined in our present curriculum and methodology. And these learning outcomes, as has been outlined by Benjamin Bloom's, these things will guide us. And as far as listening and speaking are concerned, it delivers a speech, compares programs for different occasions, speaks about objects, events in the class, school or environment and outside surroundings, and finally introduces guests, interviews, etc. So in the same way, we have learning outcomes with regard to reading and comprehending, with regard to vocabulary, with regard to grammar, and with regard to creative writing. So in creative writing, the children will come out with the producing different genre, like biographs, comparing, and poems, essays, etc., drama, essays, letters, etc. So in this way, creativity will be developed with the help of this. So in this way, dear students, we conclude that Bloom's taxonomy and academic standards are not separate, they are one and same, they are integrated together, and Bloom's taxonomy will guide us to achieve these academic standards. Thank you very much. Wish you good luck.